Hello. Did you know that the power of not reacting can radically change your life? If you feel like you are overwhelmed by emotions or situations, this video is for you. We're going to explore how inner silence and the practice of non-reaction can be powerful tools for your personal and spiritual growth. My name is Cosmin, and I have had the privilege of helping hundreds of people transform their lives through meditation techniques and several ebooks I have created on personal and spiritual development. I have seen how the practice of not reacting can lead to greater peace, clarity, and connection with oneself. This video is not for everyone, but if you feel that you are often carried away by emotions, or if you are looking for a path to a more serene and conscious life, I invite you to stay until the end. Here you will find tools and knowledge that can make a difference in your life. The act of not reacting is one of the most challenging and at the same time, most transformative principles in spiritual awakening. Although it seems simple, it actually involves a deep understanding of the nature of the mind, the ego, and our emotions. Not reacting teaches us to live with greater awareness, which allows us to see reality clearly and make decisions from a place of inner calm instead of being carried away by momentary impulses. Since ancient times, sages have spoken about the importance of calm in the face of adversity. In many spiritual philosophies and schools of thought, emphasis is placed on observing the I without getting caught up in external events. This process, although challenging, is essential to achieving greater expansion of consciousness. The human mind, by its very nature, tends to react to any external stimulus. Every word, every gesture, every glance can trigger an almost immediate emotional or mental response in us. This reactivity has been an evolutionary tool that helped our ancestors survive, allowing them to react quickly to imminent dangers. However, in the context of modern life and in the process of spiritual growth, this reactive tendency can be a major obstacle. Immediate emotional reactions are often automatic and are often based on old patterns of behavior that do not always serve us in our path of growth. When faced with any conflict or challenging situation, our mind tends to interpret what is happening through the filter of our past experiences, generating impulsive responses that often do not reflect our true nature. The process of not reacting begins with becoming aware of these patterns. By observing our automatic responses without immediately acting, we begin to see how many of our reactions are simply mental habits. We realize that we are not really reacting to the present, but rather to an interpretation we have created based on our past. When we talk about not reacting, we don't mean repressing emotions or ignoring what's happening. Instead, it's about cultivating an internal position of observation. This concept of the observer is key in spiritual awakening. Instead of identifying completely with our emotions or thoughts, we learn to observe them as if they were phenomena passing through us, without needing to get caught up in them. The observer is that part of us that can watch what is happening without judging, without interpreting. It is simply present calm, and allows external events and internal emotions to flow without getting caught up in them. It is from this perspective that we begin to dismantle the illusion that we need to react to every stimulus. By connecting with the inner observer, a space opens up between the stimulus and our response. In this space, we find the freedom to choose how we want to act, if we choose to act at all. This freedom is one of the keys to spiritual awakening, as it frees us from conditioning and allows us to live from a more authentic and conscious place. Internal silence is the foundation of non-reaction. We live in a world full of noise, not only external, but also internal. The mind is continually busy, generating thoughts, worries, judgments, and internal dialogues that distance us from the stillness necessary to make conscious decisions. Internal silence does not mean the absence of thoughts, but the ability to not identify with them. When we are in inner silence, thoughts and emotions may still arise, but they no longer drag us down. This state of calm allows us to see reality as it is, without the distortions created by our reactive mind. Instead of being carried away by the immediacy of an emotion, we are able to observe it, understand it, and if necessary, let it go without having to act on it. This inner silence also connects us to a deeper part of ourselves, a part that is beyond the mind and emotions. It is from this place of inner peace that we can live more consciously and in alignment with our true nature. The ego, that part of our psyche that identifies with the individual I, is one of the greatest sources of reactivity. The ego is always seeking to protect itself, assert itself, defend itself, or control itself. When someone offends us or challenges our ideas, it is the ego that feels threatened and seeks to react in order to keep its sense of identity intact. However, spiritual awakening invites us to question the reality of the ego. We realize that we are not the ego, but something much vaster and deeper. As we learn to detach ourselves from the needs of the ego, our automatic reactions begin to diminish. We no longer feel the same urgency to defend or assert ourselves because we understand that our essence is not in danger. Detachment from the ego doesn't mean that we stop interacting with the world, but rather that we do so from a place of greater wisdom. Not reacting is ultimately an act of humility, as it involves recognizing that not everything requires a response from us. We are not the center of the universe, and many of the situations that push us to react are actually insignificant from a broader perspective. Another important aspect of not reacting is the power of time. When we give ourselves permission not to react immediately, we give ourselves the space for emotions to calm down and our minds to clear. This simple act of waiting can completely change the way we interpret a situation. Many times when we react immediately, we do so from a place of confusion or emotional intensity. However, by waiting and allowing the waters to settle, we realize that our initial perception was distorted. What seemed like a threat or conflict may not be so serious after taking some time to reflect. Time also allows us to access greater inner wisdom. Instead of acting in the heat of the moment, we can consult our intuition and make a decision more aligned with our values and principles. This pause is one of the most powerful tools in spiritual awakening, as it gives us the space to act from a place of love and compassion rather than fear or anger. The power of non-reaction is ultimately a process of internal transformation. It invites us to unlearn the reactive habits we have developed throughout our lives and to cultivate a new way of being based on awareness, calm, and self-control. Through the practice of non-reaction, we begin to live from a place of greater freedom and authenticity, connecting with our true nature and transcending the limitations of the ego. This is just the beginning of the path towards a more conscious and spiritual life, where not reacting becomes a manifestation of the inner power that we all possess. The desire to control is one of the deepest forces driving our reactions. As humans, we tend to want to control our environment, the people around us, and especially situations that make us uncomfortable. This desire stems from fear and insecurity. We believe that by exercising control, we can avoid pain, uncertainty, or vulnerability. However, on the path of spiritual awakening, we discover that this control is illusory. We cannot control the actions, thoughts, or emotions of others, nor can we predict with certainty what will happen in the future. Life is constantly changing, and our automatic reactions are often attempts to hold on to a false sense of security. The power of non-reaction largely involves the ability to let go of that desire for control. By not feeling the need to intervene in every situation, we begin to accept the changing and unpredictable nature of life. Not only does this reduce our anxieties, but it also allows us to live with greater fluidity and harmony. The desire to control is intrinsically linked to the ego. The ego, as we discussed earlier, always seeks to assert and protect itself. It wants to be in control because it allows it to maintain a sense of power and security. When something escapes its control, the ego reacts with fear, anger, or frustration. However, as we progress in our spiritual awakening, we begin to question the veracity of these reactions. Where does this desire for control really come from? Is it an expression of our true essence, or simply a defense created by the ego? By asking ourselves these questions, we realize that true peace comes not from control, but from acceptance. Acceptance is the antithesis of control, and it is precisely through it that we find the freedom that spiritual wisdom speaks so much of. Instead of resisting what happens, we learn to flow with events, trusting that the universe or life itself has a rhythm and order beyond our understanding. Non-reaction is deeply connected to acceptance. This doesn't mean that we should accept everything that happens to us passively or without discernment, but that we don't need to resist or react emotionally to every single thing we perceive as a threat or challenge. By accepting that not everything is under our control, we begin to live from a place of greater peace and tranquility. Acceptance is not the same as resignation. Resignation comes from a place of helplessness, while acceptance is a conscious decision that arises from a deep understanding that resistance only creates more suffering. By not resisting what is beyond our control, we allow situations to flow and resolve themselves in a more harmonious way. This acceptance also invites us to look beyond the duality of good and bad. Many of our reactions arise from the mind's tendency to label every experience as either positive or negative. However, when we stop reacting immediately, we realize that what initially seemed negative can lead to profound transformation. By accepting what life brings us without judging it, we open ourselves to the possibility that everything has a purpose beyond our superficial interpretations. One of the most fertile grounds for reactivity is the realm of relationships. Interacting with others can trigger a range of intense emotions and impulsive reactions in us. Criticism, rejection, or even a simple disagreement can make us feel the need to defend ourselves or attack. In these moments, the practice of not reacting becomes a challenge, but also an immense opportunity for spiritual growth. Human relationships offer us constant mirrors of our own insecurities, fears, and desires for control. Often, what bothers us in others is a reflection of something we have not resolved within ourselves. Therefore, not reacting in these contexts is a powerful form of self-exploration. When someone criticizes or confronts us, our ego feels threatened, and our natural tendency is to react to protect ourselves. However, if instead of responding immediately, we take a moment to observe the situation from the internal observer, we can discover that external criticism is actually an opportunity to get to know ourselves better. Instead of seeing conflict as an attack, we can see it as an invitation to grow. In relationships, not reacting doesn't mean being indifferent or disconnected. Instead, it means being present from a place of greater awareness and compassion. When we don't react, we allow the conversation to flow without the emotional baggage that often distorts communication. Not only does this improve our relationships, it also allows us to learn from each interaction. One of the most powerful tools for practicing non-reaction is breathing. Breathing anchors us in the present moment and helps us calm down when we feel emotions about to boil over. When faced with a situation that could trigger a reaction, taking a moment to consciously breathe helps us create that space between the stimulus and the response. Through breathing, we remind ourselves that we are not slaves to our emotions or thoughts. We don't need to react immediately, but can observe, breathe, and respond from a place of greater clarity. This simple act of conscious breathing is a form of meditation in action, connecting us to our deepest essence and moving us away from automatic reactions. The power of breathing lies in its ability to bring us back to the present. Many of our reactions arise because we are stuck in the past, reliving old wounds, or in the future, anticipating problems that have not yet occurred. Breathing brings us back to the only moment that really exists, the now. And it is in this now that we find the freedom not to react. The act of not reacting invites us to let go of control and trust in life. This trust is not blind faith, but a deep certainty that everything is happening as it should. When we stop trying to control every aspect of our existence, we begin to flow with the natural rhythms of the universe. Letting go of control doesn't mean being passive, but rather acting from a place of mindfulness. Instead of reacting impulsively, we choose our responses wisely. In doing so, we discover that true freedom is not found in controlling the external, but in cultivating an inner state of unshakable peace. The power of non-reaction connects us to that freedom. It is a liberation from the endless cycle of action and reaction, and allows us to live from a place of greater serenity and purpose. In this practice, we find spiritual awakening, an awakening that leads us to discover our true nature, one that is not conditioned by the ups and downs of life, but remains at peace in the midst of any circumstance. Suffering is a universal experience. We have all, at some point in our lives, experienced pain, whether physical, emotional, or mental. Suffering is, for the most part, an unavoidable part of the human condition. However, it is crucial to understand that it is not the pain itself that creates suffering, but our reaction to it. Suffering occurs when we resist what is happening in the present moment. It is a product of our internal struggle against what we perceive as unacceptable or painful. When something negatively affects us, whether it is a loss, betrayal, or failure, our natural tendency is to resist, to hold on to what was or what we wanted to be. This resistance is what perpetuates suffering. This is where non-reaction takes on a transformative role. By learning not to react immediately to pain or difficult circumstances, we can observe our emotions and thoughts without getting caught up in them. This space of observation allows us to disidentify from the suffering and view it from a higher perspective. Non-reaction does not mean ignoring the pain or suppressing emotions. Rather, it is about observing the suffering without adding more emotional baggage to it. It is an invitation to be present with the pain, but without completely identifying with it. In doing so, we realize that although the pain may be present, we are not that pain. We are the observer behind the experience. Much suffering is linked to the ego. The ego not only seeks control, as we saw above, but also clings to identities and narratives that fuel suffering. When we experience emotional loss or injury, the ego tends to dramatize the situation, creating internal stories about the suffering self. For example, if someone rejects us, the ego may tell us, "You're not good enough," or "You're always getting dumped." These narratives create additional layers of suffering because we identify with them and make them part of our identity. We become the rejected person or the person who always fails, thus perpetuating the cycle of pain. The practice of non-reaction helps us dismantle these ego narratives. By observing suffering without reacting to it, we begin to see that the stories we tell ourselves are not necessarily the truth. We can experience pain without identifying with it. By not reacting to ego stories, we begin to free ourselves from the limiting identities that perpetuate suffering. Non-reaction invites us to transcend what we might call the painful self. This is the aspect of ourselves that clings to pain and makes it an integral part of our identity. Often, without realizing it, we cling to suffering because it defines us in some way. We become the suffering self and, paradoxically, find a strange comfort in that identity. Non-reaction allows us to release this painful self. When we stop reacting to pain, the painful self loses its power over us. We realize that we are much more than our experiences of suffering. We are the watching consciousness, the witness behind every experience. This recognition frees us and allows us to begin healing on a deeper level. One of the keys to transcending suffering is to stay grounded in the present moment. Suffering is exacerbated when we are stuck in the past, reliving hurts and regrets, or in the future, anticipating fears or worries. Non-reaction helps us stay in the present because it takes us out of the spiral of reactive thinking. By being present, we can see pain as it is, without the distortions of time. If we experience a difficult emotion, we can feel it fully in the present moment without getting caught up in what it means for the future or what it symbolizes about our past. This act of being present with pain without reacting to it allows us to live with greater peace and acceptance. Emotional healing is a crucial aspect of spiritual awakening. Often, unresolved suffering keeps us tied to reactive patterns that prevent us from moving forward on our spiritual path. However, non-reaction acts as a healing balm for emotional wounds. By not reacting, we create the space necessary for difficult emotions to be processed naturally. Instead of repressing or exaggerating them, emotions are given the opportunity to emerge, express themselves, and eventually dissipate. This process is deeply healing because it allows us to release emotional burdens we have been carrying for years. When we practice non-reaction, we become witnesses to our own emotions. This witnessing allows us to understand that emotions are temporary and do not define who we are. As we observe our emotions from a place of calm and neutrality, they lose their power over us, and we begin to experience deep healing. One of the most powerful results of non-reaction is the transformation of suffering into wisdom. Pain, when experienced without reaction, becomes a source of growth and learning. Rather than being something to be avoided or feared, suffering becomes a teacher that guides us toward a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world. By not reacting to suffering, we begin to see the lessons hidden behind every painful experience. Pain invites us to look inward, to uncover our limiting beliefs, our attachments, and our insecurities. It shows us where we have been clinging to control or identifying with the ego. And ultimately, it invites us to let go of all that in order to find deeper peace. This transformation of suffering into wisdom is one of the great rewards of the spiritual path. Instead of seeing pain as something that weakens us, we see it as an opportunity to awaken. By not reacting to pain, we discover that every challenge is a door that leads us to greater understanding and, ultimately, greater freedom. The ego can be understood as the mental construct we form to navigate the world, an identity based on our experiences, beliefs, roles, and attachments. Although necessary for certain functions of everyday life, the ego also tends to distort our perception of reality, keeping us trapped in illusions. The ego constantly seeks recognition, security, and control, and in the process, it keeps us separated from our true essence. One of the ego's primary illusions is the idea of separation, the belief that we are isolated entities separate from the rest of the world. This illusion is at the root of many of our internal and external conflicts. Non-reaction is a powerful antidote to the illusions of the ego, as it allows us to see beyond these mental constructs and brings us closer to the truth of who we really are. The ego feeds on our reactions. Every time we react to a situation, we feed the ego's narratives. If someone criticizes us, and our reaction is to feel offended or defend ourselves, we are reinforcing the illusion that our identity is threatened. This perpetuates the cycle of reactivity and reinforces the sense of separation. Reacting means acting impulsively out of fear, pride, insecurity, or any other emotion that comes from the ego. These reactions are often not conscious. They arise from deeply ingrained patterns that we have accumulated throughout our lives. The problem is that every time we react in this way, we are solidifying the control that the ego has over us. Non-reaction, on the other hand, frees us from these automatic cycles. By not reacting immediately to external stimuli, we create a space of awareness in which we can observe how the ego operates. We realize that the need to defend, justify, or control ourselves is a creation of the ego, not a real need of our authentic self. The process of not reacting to the ego's provocations is a path toward dismantling its illusions. When someone criticizes or challenges us, the ego immediately wants to respond, to defend its image, to reaffirm its identity. However, by practicing non-reaction, we avoid falling into these traps. In that space we create by not reacting, we can see that what is being questioned is not our true essence, but the superficial identity we have constructed. By not reacting, we begin to dissolve the layers of ego we have created over time. Every time we resist the temptation to react, we take power away from the ego and weaken it. This is a gradual process. The ego is not dismantled overnight, but each time we choose not to react, we move one step closer to our liberation. Little by little, we begin to see that many of the things that used to bother us or make us react no longer have the same power over us. This is an indication that we are disidentifying from the ego and connecting with a deeper dimension of our being. One of the main illusions that the ego perpetuates is that of the separate self. The ego makes us believe that we are individual entities, isolated from the rest of the world, and that our survival depends on protecting this identity. This leads us to compete, compare ourselves, and view others as threats or allies depending on whether they reinforce or challenge our identity. Non-reaction is a gateway to transcending this illusion. When we do not react, we realize that there is no real threat that we need to defend against. We begin to perceive the underlying connection that exists between all beings. This recognition of interconnectedness leads us to a deeper understanding that we are not separate entities, but individual expressions of a universal consciousness. By ceasing to react to situations that the ego perceives as threats, we realize that true security comes not from defending our identity, but from recognizing that there is nothing to fear at all. This understanding is a key to spiritual awakening, as it frees us from fear and allows us to live with greater peace and harmony. One of the most profound concepts related to non-reaction is the space between stimulus and response. When something happens to us, whether it's criticism, failure, or loss, the ego tends to react immediately. But between the stimulus, what happens, and our response, how we react, there is a space. This space is crucial to our spiritual growth. By practicing non-reaction, we are expanding this space between stimulus and response. Instead of reacting automatically, we take a moment to observe. In that moment, we can see our emotions, our thoughts, and our inclinations to act from the ego. But instead of following these impulses, we can consciously choose not to react. This space of observation is where transformation occurs. Through non-reaction, we begin to develop greater awareness of ourselves and how our minds operate. We realize that we don't have to be slaves to our automatic reactions. We can choose to act from a place of inner peace rather than being driven by ego. Detachment is another essential aspect of spiritual awakening that is facilitated by the practice of non-reaction. The ego clings to things, our ideas, beliefs, possessions, and relationships. It believes that these things are fundamental to our identity and happiness. However, this attachment keeps us in a constant state of anxiety and fear because we fear losing what we believe defines us. Non-reaction helps us to detach ourselves from these identities and possessions. By not reacting when something challenges us or when we lose something, we begin to realize that our essence is not dependent on these external things. This is true detachment, the ability to let go without suffering, to accept impermanence without fear. Non-attachment doesn't mean we stop loving or enjoying life. Rather, it means we love and enjoy without clinging, without depending on anything for our inner peace. When we practice non-reaction, we realize we can be fully present in life without being caught up in the fear of losing or the desire to gain. Ultimately, the power of non-reaction leads us to a profound spiritual awakening. By not reacting, we dissolve the illusions of the ego and begin to experience life from a higher perspective. We realize that we are much more than our identities, beliefs, or emotions. We are the consciousness that observes it all. This recognition leads us to greater freedom. We are no longer trapped in the cycles of reactivity that kept us prisoners of the ego. Instead, we live from a place of peace, detachment, and acceptance. This is the essence of spiritual awakening, seeing reality as it is, without the distortions of the ego, and living in harmony with it. Non-reaction is therefore a powerful tool for awakening. As we practice non-reaction, we begin to dismantle the illusions that kept us in a state of suffering and separation. And in their place, we discover a deeper truth about ourselves and the universe. When we live in a constant state of reaction, our responses to situations tend to be automatic and conditioned. This means that our actions and decisions are influenced by past experiences, inherited beliefs, and fears that have built up over the years. In this reactive mode, our decisions are not necessarily a reflection of our highest wisdom, but rather an echo of old patterns that keep repeating themselves. Non-reaction allows us to break out of these automatic cycles and access a clearer, more authentic perspective. By not reacting immediately, we create a space where we can listen to our inner wisdom, that voice that is not conditioned by ego or the noise of the external world. It is an act of reconnecting with our intuition, that inner faculty that knows what is truly best for us in any situation. When we practice non-reaction, we realize that we don't need to respond to every external stimulus impulsively. Often, inner wisdom leads us to recognize that not every situation requires an immediate or emotional response. Sometimes silence or inaction is the most powerful response, allowing us to see the bigger picture before making decisions. Non-reaction is closely related to the virtue of patience. In a world where we are constantly urged to act, react, and decide quickly, patience becomes a key tool to access our inner wisdom. Patience allows us to pause, observe, and wait for the right moment to act, if action is necessary. This pause is where wisdom emerges. Rather than being carried away by the heat of the moment, patience invites us to look at the situation from a broader perspective. It gives us time to reflect, to discern what is truly important and what is simply a passing distraction. By cultivating patience, we learn not to be carried away by momentary impulses and instead make decisions from a place of clarity and balance. Patience is not a lack of action, but rather a conscious action. It allows us to act at the right moment, when our intuition guides us, rather than reacting from fear, anger, or anxiety. In that space of patience, we connect with a deeper source of wisdom, and our decisions reflect that inner wisdom rather than external influences or reactive emotions. Another important facet of non-reaction is the development of inner discipline. Not reacting to every external provocation or stimulus requires a significant level of self-control and self-awareness. As we strengthen our ability to not react, we are also training our mind and emotions to not be slaves to external circumstances. Inner discipline is an essential aspect of spiritual awakening. Without this discipline, it is easy to fall into the chaos of reactive emotions and thoughts, which takes us away from our inner peace and wisdom. However, discipline is not about repressing our emotions or desires. Instead, it is about cultivating a state of conscious presence, where our emotions and thoughts can be observed without needing to be immediately acted upon. The practice of non-reaction helps us develop this discipline. By observing our emotions and thoughts without reacting, we are training our mind to be stronger and clearer. We become able to maintain our inner calm even in challenging situations, and this allows us to act from a place of wisdom and compassion rather than from impulse or ego. The inner discipline we develop through non-reaction also allows us to align ourselves with our deepest values. When we don't react to every provocation, we have the opportunity to act in accordance with our principles rather than being carried away by passing emotions or external expectations. This leads us to live more authentically and in harmony with our true essence. Non-reaction not only connects us to our inner wisdom, but also opens us to a deeper understanding of others and the world around us. By not immediately reacting to the actions or words of others, We give ourselves the space to understand their motivations, fears, and sufferings. This leads to greater compassion and empathy as we stop seeing others as adversaries or threats and begin to perceive them as beings on their own journey of learning and evolution. When we react impulsively, it's easy to misinterpret the intentions of others. Often, our reactions are based on assumptions and projections of our own unresolved wounds. However, by practicing non-reaction, we allow deeper, more authentic understanding to reveal itself. We realize that many times the actions of others are not personal attacks, but simply reflections of their own internal struggles. This understanding allows us to respond from a place of greater compassion and love. By not reacting from ego, we can see others more clearly and respond in a way that promotes peace and harmony rather than conflict. Non-reaction helps us break cycles of misunderstanding and confrontation, as it allows us to see beyond surface appearances and connect with the underlying truth. One of the most profound aspects of non-reaction is access to inner silence. This silence is not simply the absence of noise or thoughts, but a state of deep serenity where we can hear the wisdom of being. In this state of silence, we connect with the deepest part of ourselves, that part that is beyond ego, emotions, and reactive thoughts. Inner silence is where wisdom resides. When we learn not to react and to stay in the space of silence, we realize that many of the answers we seek are already within us. We do not need to look outside for what is already present within us. Silence reveals to us the deepest truths about ourselves and about the nature of reality. This state of inner silence is not easy to achieve in a world filled with constant distractions and stimuli. However, the practice of non-reaction helps us cultivate this silence. Every time we choose not to react, we are strengthening our connection to this state of inner stillness. And from this stillness, a wisdom emerges that cannot be found in words or actions, but only in being itself. It is important to note that the wisdom that comes from non-reaction is not an intellectual wisdom. It is not about accumulating knowledge or having the right answer to every situation. Instead, it is an intuitive wisdom that comes from the heart and the being. It is a deep understanding that cannot be fully expressed in words, but it guides our actions and decisions in a fluid and natural way. When we access this wisdom, our actions do not come from the reactive mind or the desire to control. Instead, they flow from a place of deep understanding and connection with the whole. This is the essence of spiritual awakening, living and acting from a place of inner wisdom rather than from the ego or conditioned mind. In this sense, non-reaction becomes a tool not only to avoid suffering or conflict, but to access a deeper dimension of life. It allows us to live with greater presence, compassion, and authenticity, guided by a wisdom that goes beyond what the mind can understand. Society constantly pushes us to react, to give quick responses, to conform to norms and expectations that often do not reflect who we really are. From a young age, we learn to fit in, to avoid rejection, and to seek validation from others. This social pressure pushes us into automatic reactions, and in the process, we disconnect from our true essence. Every time we react impulsively, whether to please others or to defend our image, we are operating from a place of insecurity and fear. We move away from our authenticity to conform to what we believe the environment expects of us. This keeps us trapped in a cycle of self-deception, where our actions do not reflect who we really are, but rather an idealized or modified version of ourselves. Non-reaction interrupts this cycle. It gives us the opportunity to pause before responding to external demands, allowing us to evaluate whether our reaction is authentic or simply a reflection of social conditioning. By learning not to react automatically, we give ourselves space to act from a place of authenticity. We begin to discover what we really want, what we really think, and how we wish to interact with the world from our true essence. One of the great barriers to authenticity is the ego. The ego, as we conceive it here, is that part of us that is constantly concerned with self-image, the approval of others, and avoiding any form of vulnerability. It is always ready to react, whether to defend itself, to attack, or to control the situation. The ego fears that if we don't react, we will lose the control, respect, or recognition it believes is necessary for its survival. That's why our immediate reaction often comes from the ego. We feel the need to defend our position, to prove that we're right, or to protect ourselves from a perceived attack. However, these reactions only perpetuate a cycle of suffering and dissatisfaction, as they don't allow us to act from a place of truth. Practicing non-reaction is an act of dismantling the ego. It allows us to observe how, behind every reactive impulse, there is an unmet need, a fear, or an insecurity. By not reacting, we are not feeding the ego, but rather allowing it to dissolve. Over time, this practice helps us see that we do not need to defend our image or control every situation, because our authentic essence does not depend on external validation. By letting go of the control that the ego tries to exert, we begin to experience a much deeper inner freedom. Authenticity requires space. In a fast-moving world where we are expected to give immediate responses, it is difficult to find that space. However, non-reaction provides us with just that space to breathe, to reflect, and to act from a place of internal alignment. Every time we choose not to react immediately, we create a space where we can explore our true emotions, intentions, and desires. This space gives us time to decide if the response we are going to give is consistent with who we really are, or if it is simply an automatic reaction to meet external expectations. Authenticity flourishes when we allow ourselves to act from our inner truth, rather than from fear or the desire to please. In that space of non-reaction, we also find the opportunity to observe how situations and others affect us. We can see more clearly how our thoughts and emotions fluctuate, and we realize that we are not slaves to those fluctuations. This level of self-observation is crucial to living authentically, as it allows us to discern between what is temporary and what is lasting within us. Living authentically is not easy. It requires the courage to disagree, to be different, and to resist the pressure to conform. Non-reaction is, in this sense, an act of courage. By not reacting, we allow ourselves not to give in to the pressure to give a quick answer or to meet the expectations of others. We choose to be true to ourselves, even if that means facing the discomfort of uncertainty or rejection. When we practice non-reaction, we are consciously choosing not to follow the path of least resistance, which is to react immediately and as expected. Instead, we choose to stand firm in our truth, waiting for the right moment to act, or in some cases, not act at all. This is an act of profound courage, because it involves risking being misunderstood or judged, but it is also an act of authenticity, because we align ourselves with our true essence rather than seeking external validation. One of the greatest blessings of practicing non-reaction is self-discovery. When we stop automatically reacting to every stimulus, we begin to know ourselves on a deeper level. We become aware of our patterns, our wounds, and our subconscious motivations. This self-observation leads us to a greater understanding of who we really are, beyond the conditioning and masks we have adopted. Non-reaction opens the door to introspection. It invites us to ask ourselves why we react in certain ways, what underlying emotions are driving our actions, and what limiting beliefs are ruling our lives. This process of self-discovery is essential to living authentically, as it allows us to identify the areas in which we are not being true to ourselves and work to align our actions with our inner truth. By not reacting, we also discover a deeper facet of our being. That part of us that is immune to external fluctuations, that remains at peace regardless of what is happening in the outside world. This is our most authentic essence, the part of us that has always been there, waiting to be rediscovered. Connecting with this essence is the ultimate goal of spiritual awakening and the path to an authentic life. Non-reaction is an ongoing practice, just like authenticity. It's not about reaching a final state of enlightenment or perfection, but about being constantly in tune with our inner self. Every day, every moment, gives us the opportunity to practice non-reaction and to choose to act from a place of authenticity rather than from fear or need for approval. As we continue to cultivate non-reaction, we realize that we don't always have to have all the answers, nor do we have to react to every situation that comes our way. We learn to trust the process, our intuition, and the wisdom that arises from within. And in that process, we discover that authenticity is not a destination, but rather an ongoing journey of self-discovery and growth. Living authentically means being constantly evolving, always open to learning more about ourselves and the world around us. Non-reaction gives us the opportunity to walk this path with greater clarity and purpose, guided by the inner truth that has always been within us. The world often teaches us that we must control external circumstances in order to feel safe and at peace. The dominant culture pushes us to take control of our lives, to manage situations, and to react quickly to challenges. However, this desire for external control is illusory. The more we try to control the world around us, the more frustrated we become because most things are beyond our control. Other people's behavior, unexpected situations, life changes. Everything is constantly in motion and rarely follows our expectations. The desire to control what is external is actually a manifestation of fear. We fear the unknown, the unpredictable, and we believe that if we can manipulate or manage our environment, we will avoid suffering. But this type of control is exhausting and counterproductive. By focusing on controlling what is outside of us, we lose sight of the only thing that is truly under our control: our own mind, emotions, and reactions. The practice of non-reaction teaches us that true control lies not in manipulating the outside world, but in how we manage our inner world. When we choose not to react impulsively, we are taking control of our mind and emotions. This does not mean that we become apathetic or indifferent to what is happening around us, but rather that we consciously choose how we respond to situations from a place of inner calm and clarity. Inner control involves being in touch with our own ability to stay centered, even in the midst of chaos. While the external world may be full of uncertainty and constant change, our inner world has the potential to be a space of peace and stability. Non-reaction allows us to cultivate this inner space, because by not getting swept away by every stimulus, we create a protective barrier between our inner peace and external events. Interestingly, by learning to control our reactions, we gain a greater sense of freedom. At first, it may feel like non-reaction is a restriction, as if we are forbidding ourselves to respond naturally. However, what we are really doing is freeing ourselves from the chains of automatic reaction. Instead of being slaves to our emotions and the behavior of others, we are choosing how we want to respond, which gives us a greater sense of autonomy and freedom. True freedom comes not from doing whatever we want at all times, but from having the ability to consciously decide when and how to act. Automatic reaction, on the other hand, is a form of bondage. We are trapped in conditioned patterns of behavior that keep us from our true will. Non-reaction, on the other hand, is liberation. It gives us the space to choose our path, rather than simply reacting to what life throws at us. One of the great revelations that comes from practicing non-reaction is that we begin to connect with a deeper wisdom within ourselves. When we don't react immediately, we create a space of silence where we can listen to our intuition and inner wisdom. Instead of being swayed by emotional impulses or external pressure, we begin to tune into an inner source of knowing that has always been there, but has often been drowned out by the noise of our reactions. This inner wisdom guides us toward decisions that are more aligned with our true selves. When we react automatically, we often make decisions based on fear, anxiety, or the desire to please others. But when we practice non-reaction, we have the time and space to evaluate our options from a broader and deeper perspective. Inner wisdom helps us see beyond the immediate moment, guiding us toward choices that will bring us long-term peace and growth. Non-reaction does not imply passivity or submission. It is not about accepting everything that happens without doing anything. In fact, it is about something much more powerful: the ability to choose our reaction. By not reacting automatically, we are asserting our power of choice. Instead of being puppets controlled by circumstances, we become the authors of our own responses. This power of choice is one of the greatest gifts of spiritual awakening. It frees us from being victims of circumstances and gives us responsibility for how we want to live our lives. We can decide when to act and when to remain silent, when to stand up for ourselves and when to give in, when to move forward and when to wait. Every choice we make from this place of inner control is an affirmation of our autonomy and our commitment to living a more conscious and fulfilling life. Inner control is intrinsically linked to patience. Non-reaction teaches us to be patient, not only with others, but also with ourselves. We often want things to happen immediately, for problems to be solved instantly, and for our emotions to calm down automatically. However, patience reminds us that growth and transformation take time. The practice of non-reaction is also the practice of waiting for the right moment. Non-reaction does not mean doing nothing, but rather waiting until we are in a state of mental and emotional clarity to act in a way that is aligned with our inner wisdom. This patience allows us to see situations from a broader perspective and gives us the time needed to act with precision and discernment, rather than impulsively. Emotional control is not about repressing our emotions or denying them. Instead, it is about learning to observe our emotions without letting them take over. Non-reaction is an essential tool in achieving this type of control. When we do not react immediately, we create space to observe our emotions instead of letting them take over. Emotions are powerful energies that can cloud our judgment and lead us to act in ways we later regret. However, by practicing non-reaction, we learn not to completely identify with our emotions. We realize that even though emotions are intense, they don't have to dictate our actions. We can feel an emotion, observe it, understand it, and then decide how we want to respond from a place of inner calm. The ultimate goal of inner control is peace of mind. When we stop reacting to every external stimulus, our mind becomes calmer and clearer. We are no longer in a constant state of agitation or conflict, trying to manage every situation that comes our way. Instead, we cultivate an inner serenity that allows us to navigate through life with greater ease and grace. Peace of mind is not the absence of challenges or problems, but the ability to stay centered and balanced in the midst of them. Non-reaction allows us to access this peace because it frees us from the need to constantly fight what is happening. Instead of resisting or controlling the flow of life, we learn to flow with it, trusting that our inner peace is strong enough to sustain us in any situation. As we delve deeper into the concept of non-reaction, we begin to realize that one of the most powerful elements of this practice is the ability to observe. Conscious observation becomes a vital tool on the path of spiritual awakening. When we cultivate the ability to observe without judging or reacting, we begin to access a deeper understanding of ourselves and our relationship to the world. Mindful observation involves paying attention to our thoughts, emotions, and reactions without getting carried away by them. It is an act of mindfulness, where we remain present in the moment and observe the flow of life as it is. This practice allows us to distance ourselves from our emotions and thoughts, creating a space between the stimulus and our response. By observing without reacting, we begin to recognize patterns in our own behavior and in the reactions of others. We become aware of how our automatic responses are shaped by past beliefs, fears, and conditioning. This clarity allows us to let go of reactions that no longer serve us and begin to act from a place that is more authentic and aligned with our inner self. When we allow ourselves to simply observe, we begin to tune into a deeper wisdom that is often hidden beneath the surface of our automatic reactions. This wisdom arises from a state of calm and openness, where we can see things as they are, unveiled by our distorted perceptions. Non-reaction allows us to access this wisdom, because by letting go of judgment and immediate interpretation, we can see the truth of situations. Life is a constant flow of experiences, and by learning to observe rather than react, we begin to understand that each experience has something to teach us. Every challenge, every conflict, and every joy become valuable lessons that help us grow and evolve. The ability to observe also extends to our interactions with others. When we practice non-reaction, we can see others without the filter of our own emotions. This allows us to develop greater empathy and compassion toward their experiences. Instead of reacting from a place of judgment or defense, we can simply observe and understand what the other person is feeling. Empathy is essential in our human relationships. By not immediately reacting to others' words or actions, we give ourselves the space to understand their perspectives and emotions. This deep understanding not only improves our relationships, but also allows us to respond more effectively and lovingly. Observation requires patience. In a world that often pushes us toward immediacy, taking the time to observe can feel like a challenge. However, it is in this patience that lies immense power. Non-reaction teaches us that we don't always have to have an immediate response or act right away. Sometimes the greatest act of wisdom is to simply wait, observe, and allow the truth to reveal itself. Patience helps us integrate the lessons of our experiences. It allows us to step back and see the bigger picture, rather than getting lost in the frustration or anxiety of the moment. This conscious pause can transform the way we approach life, allowing us to be more proactive rather than reactive. Mindfulness becomes a spiritual practice in itself. It connects us to the present and allows us to see life as a continuous learning process. Non-reaction helps us to turn off autopilot and become aware of each moment. Instead of living in a constant state of distraction, we begin to experience life in its fullness. This practice of observation also brings us to a greater sense of connection with the universe. By watching the flow of life without judging or resisting it, we realize that we are part of something bigger. Every experience, every person we encounter, and every challenge we face has a purpose within the fabric of the cosmos. Non-reaction also opens the door to authenticity. When we let go of automatic responses and begin to observe, we find ourselves in a space where we can truly be ourselves. Authenticity is not an act of rebellion. It is simply the recognition of who we are at our core. When we react from fear or insecurity, we often act in ways that don't reflect our true selves. By practicing non-reaction, however, we have the opportunity to connect with our authenticity. The decisions we make and the actions we choose become reflections of our essence, rather than impulsive responses to external circumstances. The practice of conscious observation and non-reaction brings about profound transformation. Over time, we begin to notice significant changes in the way we relate to ourselves and the world. Transformation does not happen overnight, but each moment of observation brings us one step closer to greater understanding and peace. In the end, non-reaction is a path to liberation. It allows us to shed the expectations and fears that have kept us trapped and leads us toward a fuller, more meaningful life. By observing without judgment, we begin to see the world with new eyes, and every experience becomes an opportunity to learn and grow. On the path of spiritual awakening, the practice of non-reaction is deeply intertwined with the search for inner silence. This silence is not simply the absence of external noise. It is a state of deep calm that allows us to connect with our most authentic self. In a world saturated with stimuli, finding this inner refuge becomes crucial to our spiritual growth and well-being. Modern life is full of distractions. From the constant notifications on our devices to the bombardment of information on social media, we often find it difficult to find a space of quiet. However, inner silence becomes a source of power in our spiritual quest. It is in this silence that we can hear the voice of our intuition and inner wisdom. When we learn not to react to the noise of the world, we begin to open up a space for reflection and contemplation. This space allows us to step away from the chaos and get in touch with our deepest essence. Here, in the inner silence, we can explore our emotions, thoughts, and beliefs without the noise of immediate reaction. Inner silence acts as an alchemy that transforms our experiences. When we are in a calm state, We are able to observe our emotions without identifying with them. This process of disidentification frees us from the power that emotions can have over us. Instead of being swept away by impulsive reactions, we can see emotions as passing phenomena that come and go. When practicing non-reaction, silence becomes an ally. It gives us the opportunity to take a breath before responding. This pause is critical, as it allows us to consider our responses from a place of clarity and understanding, rather than impulsiveness. Non-reaction in the context of inner silence teaches us to act rather than react, to choose wisely rather than let our emotions guide us. One of the most effective tools for cultivating inner silence is meditation. By taking time to meditate, we create a space where we can observe our thoughts and emotions without judging them. Meditation teaches us to be present, to connect with our breathing, and to allow silence to envelop us. In this state of meditation, the practice of non-reaction becomes more accessible. As we become more familiar with silence, we become more aware of our automatic reactions. Instead of being carried away by disturbing emotions or thoughts, we begin to recognize them and let them pass. This skill translates into greater serenity in our daily lives. Inner silence also acts as a healing space. In a world that often feels overwhelming, silence allows us to disconnect from external pressures and reconnect with ourselves. This healing space is essential for processing painful experiences and releasing repressed emotions. When we practice non-reaction in a state of silence, we can approach our emotional wounds with compassion. Instead of reacting from the pain, we begin to observe it from a broader perspective. This act of observation helps us understand the transitory nature of pain and allows us to let go of attachment to the stories we tell ourselves about our experiences. Inner silence also connects us to the whole. When we find the space of stillness, we begin to realize that we are part of a larger universe. In silence, we can hear the wisdom of life itself, sense the interconnectedness of all things, and recognize that our individual experiences are just one part of the vast fabric of existence. This understanding of interconnectedness helps us cultivate greater empathy toward others. When we don't immediately react to others' words or actions, we can see beyond differences and recognize the humanity we share. Non-reaction, coupled with inner silence, allows us to respond from a place of love and compassion. Incorporating moments of silence into our daily lives is essential to sustaining the power of non-reaction. This can be as simple as taking a few minutes at the beginning or end of the day to sit quietly, breathe deeply, and connect with our inner selves. We can also seek out moments of silence in the midst of our daily activities, such as during a walk in nature or while enjoying a cup of tea. This conscious act of seeking silence reminds us that despite the hustle and bustle of life, we can always find refuge within our being. The practice of silence in daily life is a way to reaffirm our commitment to spiritual awakening and non-reaction. Furthermore, inner silence is a breeding ground for creativity. When we take time to be quiet, we allow ideas and inspiration to flow without the interference of distractions. Creativity thrives in a calm environment, where we can listen to our inner voice and explore new possibilities. By practicing non-reaction and finding silence, we can access a depth of thought that is often lost in the rush of life. This creativity becomes an authentic expression of our being, and our actions and decisions can be guided by a deeper sense of purpose. Integrating non-reaction into our daily lives involves conscious commitment. Often, automatic reactions are conditioned responses that we have learned over the years. To dismantle these patterns, it is essential to practice mindfulness in every interaction. This means paying attention to our emotions and thoughts in real time, and remembering that there is always a space between a stimulus and our response. This process of integration begins with self-observation. By observing our reactions in everyday situations, we can identify moments when we give in to impulsiveness. In doing so, we begin to create a new habit, that of pausing before responding. This moment of pause is crucial, as it allows us to choose how we want to respond, rather than being guided by our momentary emotions. In addition to working on ourselves, we can also cultivate an environment that encourages non-reaction. This involves surrounding ourselves with people who value calm and understanding, as well as fostering an environment where open communication and mutual respect are the norm. By creating a safe space for expression and dialogue, everyone involved can benefit from non-reaction. It is also important to keep in mind that the reactions of others are not a reflection of our worth. When someone reacts intensely, they may be dealing with their own internal challenges. By practicing non-reaction, we not only improve our own lives, but we also offer an example of calm to others, fostering an environment of peace and serenity. Integrating non-reaction also goes hand in hand with developing compassion. When we let go of our defensive reactions, we open up space for understanding and empathy. By observing others from a place of calm, we can see their struggles and vulnerabilities, allowing us to connect on a deeper level. Compassion doesn't mean ignoring our own needs. Rather, it's about finding a balance between being kind to ourselves and others. Non-reaction helps us set healthy boundaries, as it allows us to respond assertively and caringly, rather than reacting from a place of frustration or anger. The inner silence we have cultivated becomes a place of ongoing reflection. As we integrate non-reaction into our lives, it is vital to take time to reflect on our experiences and learnings. This can include journaling, practicing meditation, or simply spending time in nature. These moments of reflection allow us to process what we have learned and observe how we have changed. They help us appreciate the small advances on our spiritual path and recognize the moments when we have applied non-reaction effectively. This self-compassion is essential in the journey of transformation. As we commit to integrating non-reaction, we experience a personal transformation. We become more aware of our emotions and thoughts, allowing us to handle difficult situations with grace and calm. Life feels less chaotic as we learn to see challenges as opportunities to grow and learn. This transformation process not only affects our relationship with ourselves, but also improves our relationships with others. By responding from a place of authenticity and compassion, our interactions become more meaningful and fulfilling. We create deeper, healthier connections, which enriches our lives and the lives of those around us. The practice of non-reaction and finding inner silence is an ongoing journey. As we move forward, it is important to remember that it is not about reaching a state of perfection, but rather about committing to continuing to learn and grow. Each day offers us new opportunities to practice non-reaction and deepen our connection to ourselves and the world. Spiritual life is not a goal, but rather a series of steps towards self-exploration and understanding. As we commit to this journey, let us remember that every little step counts. Consistent practice will lead us to a place of greater peace and authenticity, where we can live more fully. Ultimately, the power of non-reaction and spiritual awakening are an interconnected journey. The practice of non-reaction teaches us to be present in the moment, to observe without judgment, and to connect with our deepest essence. By integrating these teachings into our daily lives, we move closer to a state of greater peace and authenticity. Each of us has the potential to transform our lives and relationships through this practice. As we cultivate inner silence and non-reaction, we align ourselves with our authentic self and the flow of the universe. This is a path to awakening that invites us to live with love, compassion, and authenticity. So the journey continues, and every step we take towards non-reaction is a step towards a more conscious and meaningful life. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe, give it a like, and activate the bell so you don't miss any of my content. Also, I would love for you to leave a comment with the phrase, "Inner silence is my refuge," so that we can share our experiences and grow together on this journey of transformation. Thank you for being here, and see you in the next video.